Good evening, everybody. Welcome back to the digital platform of Sadhan Chandra Mohavidyalaya. I, Gautam Maji, Assistant Professor as well as Head of the Department of English of Sadhan Chandra Mohavidyalaya, welcome you all. I'm back with the session number 13. And in this session, we're very fortunate to have our distinguished guest. Uh, we are fortunate because she already delivered her precious lecture on our platform, and again I requested her to deliver another lecture, and she also agreed. And she is with us today. She is Nikhila Harista. So first, I would like to welcome our ma'am virtually on our platform. Then I will tell about her. Then we'll begin our insightful lecture. So, first of all, I'd like to welcome our Honorable Ma'am. Ma'am, welcome on our platform, and thank you very much for accepting our invitation for the second time. And really, we are honored for your presence on our platform. Before Dr. Nikhila H. Commences her lecture, Nikhila H. is Associate Professor in the Department of Film Studies, the English and Foreign Language University, Hyderabad, where she teaches. She has been teaching for nearly 25 years with teaching stints at undergraduate colleges in Bangalore for 6 years, Pondicherry Central University for 8 years, and now in EPL University, Hyderabad for the past 10 years. She got her doctorate from Bangalore University for her dissertation on gender partisan. She has published books, articles in journals, e-magazines, and book chapters on cinema and gender. She has organized seminars, film festivals, and workshops. She has been invited speaker in various seminars, conferences, and resource person at various workshops and HDC UDC organized program. She has presented papers in more than 60 national and international conferences and is on the editorial board and advisory board of international journals. She supervises research in film studies, and seven students have been awarded their PhD degree under her supervision. A recent publication are on filmic remakes and multimodal translations between different Indian languages. Our current research projects include a commissioned essay for a volume of Sam Benegal and for a collaborative volume on new cinemas of India, where she is researching on new age Kannada films. So, thank you very much, ma'am, for accepting once again our invitation. And, ma'am, if you would like to say about our venture that you are one of the parts of our venture, so we'd be very happy to listen to you.
Thank you, Gautam Maji, for your introduction and for inviting me again to be a part of this program that you're organizing, this series of special sessions, special lecture sessions that you've been organizing. I see that it is session 13. It's not easy in these times to be organizing something in such a continuous fashion to get speakers, provide a platform, and week after week, to have these lectures, reaching out both to students and to peers, from the discipline. So, first of all, I heartily congratulate you for taking this up. And also thank you for asking me to be a part of this platform again in the form of today's lecture. All the best to you for further lectures. Hope these sessions continue in this fashion, and hope we come out of the pandemic situation soon as well. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, ma'am, we are honored, honestly speaking, that you have stated that it is a very difficult task to continue a lecture series in that fashion. Honestly speaking, it's very difficult, but it would not be possible without the help of the professors like you. So obviously, without you, without the people like you, it would not be possible. So thank you very much once again. So today, our distinguished guest is going to deliver a lecture on a topic which is narration in cinema. So before ma'am commences her insightful lecture, so I would like to inform all the participants who are watching her right now. So if you have any question, you can ask her question. How? That you can drop your question in the comment box, and after her lecture, she will answer all the questions that you will deliver in the comment box. So if you have question, do dropping the question in the comment box. After the lecture, I'm coming back to ma'am with these questions. So ma'am, the session is yours, and we are ready to listen to another insightful session. Thank you very much on my side, and the session is yours, ma'am.
Thank you. So I'll begin my talk now. I have a PowerPoint presentation, so I'll share screen so that we go on to the PowerPoint now. Yeah. So the presentation today will be on the topic narration in cinema. As Gautam Maji introduced me to you, I teach in the Department of Film Studies, the English and Foreign Languages University. I think most of us who are part of this conversation today are in some ways connected with literature. We're all either students of literature, or we are interested in narratives that manifest in language in the form of novels, short stories, novellas, folk tales, and so on. As English studies is expanding its boundaries to become widely and loosely defined as cultural studies, our corpus of narratives is also widening to include various kinds of narratives. For instance, historical narratives, that is, the way in which history is narrated by historiographers. Gautam Maji mentioned that my work was on partition. I did look at new histories of partition as part of my PhD work. Or narratives that are part of hybrid media, that is, those narratives that use not only language but also image, both still and moving, sound, music, etc., such as comics, advertisements, films, and web series. So the aim of this presentation is not to give a comprehensive theory of narratives, but to talk about what is specific to filmic narratives. That is, how filmic narratives are constructed and how the cinematic medium tells stories. The focus in this presentation is on the process of unfolding of narratives through narration. The plan of the presentation goes something like this. First, we'll talk about cinema and as moving image and one-shot narration. Here, by one-shot narration, I mean early cinema, cinema which did not have cuts, which is in some ways pre-editing. So what does narration look like in a one-shot film? So we'll begin with that. We'll talk about how evocation of space, that is what is called as mise-en-scène and cinematography, happens in such one-shot narratives. Then we'll talk about causality in cinema, the retrospective process of meaning making via editing. Here we'll particularly look at one kind of editing that has become very, very prominent in film studies, in filmmaking actually. And then we'll talk about temporality in cinema, where we look at manipulations of time that happens through juxtaposition of images. We'll talk a little bit about narrators. Narrators can be visual narrators and sound narrators. These are basically entities or agents that organize visuals and sound for us. So they perform a particular kind of function in cinema. And then we'll talk in the last instance about narration and focalization. We'll talk about three kinds of focalization that Gerard Genet has given to us, now applied to cinema: zero internal and external focalization. So broadly, these are the areas that I would be covering in the presentation today. So let me begin by giving a kind of working definition of narration. I take Peter Verstraeten's film narratology, the definition from Peter Verstraeten's film narratology, to help me define narration in this fashion. Narration is the representation of a perceptible temporal development. So, one of the first identifying aspects of narration is, of course, temporal development. There must be some kind of movement in time. For film, this means that showing a moving image may already suffice to create a narration. This is, I'm talking about, as I said, pre-editing. Just showing image that moves on the screen itself has narration in some kind of a capsule form. I'll give you examples for each of these that I'm talking about here. The showing of moving images concerns a first level of narrativity. Filmic showing is never a neutral act, but always an act of interpretation by the visual narrator. So, the visual narrator, who is in charge of organizing the visuals for us, always provides us, puts on show the visuals, always with the aim of or with the intention of meaning something or providing some view into a world that the visual narrator wants us to see. So it's not a neutral act. That's what I mean. So that's what I'm trying to say here. That it's never a neutral act. That it's always open for always an act of interpretation that the visual narrator is setting up for us. We could define filmic narration as showing a moving image with the option of editing or with the option of adding either editing or sound. So you have a one-shot narration, but later on, as we see in the history of cinema, when editing comes into play in a major way, and of course with the coming of sound technology, what transformations come about in filmic narration. We look at all these stages, in a somewhat capsule form in the course of this presentation. Let me begin by showing this short clip. This is an example of a one-shot narration. I'll stop sharing this presentation and I'll go to sharing the video for a moment. I hope the video is visible. It has no sound. It's a silent film. I hope you can all see the video. Please notice that there is one person in the frame. The second person enters the frame from the right side. He's put his foot on the hose pipe. Look at what happens. Yeah. Yeah, now I go back to my presentation. So as you see in this early film, it was early silent film, which was made in 1895. It's a staged act. So it's not something that the camera just happened to capture. There is a stationary camera and there is an act put up before that stationary camera. So this is something that is constructed by the visual narrator for us, with one actor already within the frame. You saw one actor who was watering the garden on the left side, and then a second actor who drives the action, who enters the frame from the right side and sets off the comical action. The first actor then has his revenge when he gets hold of the second actor, but you would have noticed that the capture of the second actor does not happen outside of the frame. In fact, it happens at the edge of the frame on our left before dragging him up front closer to the camera as if to give us a better view of the beating. Then actor 1 briefly looks towards the camera and actor 2 runs away, and before exiting the frame, again he looks briefly towards the camera as if asking us, "Did you watch what I just did?" So here is an example of a very simple narration, what you can call as a visual that is exhibiting first order narrativity. So this is before any kind of editing is used. This is one shot completely with two actors and a series or a sequence of events that unfold before us. So, is there narration here? Is there a story that is, coming through? I suppose there is, because there are a sequence of events that are unfolding in time before our eyes in this video, as we saw. Um, what are the elements that you notice in this very very simple video that came probably at the beginning of the cinema technology, the invention of cinema technology? There is an attempt to locate the characters in a space. So what is the space? It looks like a garden, and the characters are not just in any part of the garden. They are very much placed keeping in mind the position of the camera. And also the characters are located in relation to each other. There is already someone in the frame and someone else. The second actor enters the frame later on. So our eyes move from one actor to the other. So the second actor is not already within the frame. As you notice, he enters the frame a few seconds later. And then the whole aspect of framing itself, where the action happens and how these two are within that frame and not stepping out of the frame. You can see the kind of lighting that is used, the movement of the characters with respect to the position of the camera. Also the angle of taking the shot. So it's whether it's high or low or eye level, the distance of filming, of the camera, the distance between the camera and the actors who are being filmed, the focusing, the long shot or close up, zooming in or out. Here we don't see too much of zooms or anything. As I said, it is incipient technology. So the actors themselves move closer to the camera rather than the camera zooming in or out. In this instance, it's of course a stationary camera, but later on when technology develops, you can see camera which moves, pans and tracks the characters. Also the kind of lenses used, the color manipulations that happen, the type of film stock that was used. That is, I'm talking about it in the time of celluloid. Now, of course, we all know that we use digital technology. So all these matter in the evocation of space and in narration, even in a very simple one-shot kind of visual. Now I move to the second visual again, which is a very short video. Please notice this video. I'll stop this and we'll go to the video once again. Yeah. So again, this is a silent film. Please notice what happens, in these shots. Yeah, I'll come back to the PowerPoint now. So, what you see here in this particular video is a demonstration of what is called as montage. So, this is a short film which demonstrates the effect of film editing, or what is called as montage effect. Now, you saw a shot A, which is the shot of a particular actor, and you saw shot B, which follows shot A, and the two combine to give a particular meaning. So, in the first instance, you saw an actor, and then you saw, let's say, a plate of food. So immediately after looking at the plate of food, you understood that the actor in shot A is hungry. So the expression in his eyes is hunger. Next, again, we had a repetition of shot A, this time followed not by a plate of food, but by a body of a dead child. So we saw a dead body of a child in a coffin. So immediately you retrospectively understand that the previous shot means, that is, the expression of the actor means that he is grieving for the child that is dead. Once again, you had the same shot of a man, followed by the shot of a woman, an alluringly dressed up woman. And you then again interpreted the shot of the actor as expressing desire for the woman. So, shot A, the actor is looking out of the frame and emoting. Shot B, the shot that follows each time is a subjective shot of what this actor is ostensibly looking at. The interpretation of the actor's facial expression in shot A changes depending on what follows each time. So whether it is a plate of food, whether it is coffin, or whether it is a beautiful woman, depending upon that, we interpret the actor's expression as by the images that follow each time. So this is the montage effect, where through editing, a very simple juxtaposition of images, we get a certain meaning which is greater than what either shot A or shot B individually conveys to us. So here it is interesting to talk about how a causal link is created. So as we know in narration, one of the important factors is that such a causal link is created between shots. So according, as we saw in Kuleshov effect, what happens is in cinema, a causal link is drawn between the shots in retrospect by looking at the shots that follow. So after a shot unfolds, we go back and interpret the shots that we saw earlier. When we see the actor, questions arise. So in this film, what is he looking at? Is he looking at us? Or is he seeing something out of the frame? Is he looking at something outside of the frame? When we see the food, we interpret his facial expression to mean hunger. When we see successive shots of a child in a coffin and a beautiful woman, we interpret the actor's expression as grief and desire, respectively. So this is how causality works in cinema. So we saw how evocation of space happens through cinematography and mise-en-scène in the first example. In this example, with minimal editing through the Kuleshov effect, we see how causality works. It seems that when the film, this Kuleshov effect, was first shown, the audience raved about of his mood over the soup, the way he was touched and moved by the deep sorrow with which he looked on the dead child, and noted the lust with which he observed the woman. But we know that in all three cases, the face was exactly the same. So each time our meaning, the meaning that we ascribe to that particular actor changes, but that's only because of what follows. the expression per se is the same in each of those repetitive shots of the actor. Now I'll move to my third and last video example. This is from Closer Home. This is from Dada Saheb Phalke's Shri Krishna Janma. Again, I'll stop this PowerPoint and go back to the video. Yeah, please again notice I'll play it for a while, so please keep noticing what happens for about a couple of minutes. Again, this is a silent film, so don't worry about audio. There is no audio. Okay, I'll go back to my PowerPoint. Yeah. So this is again an early film, a 1918 film, but you will see certain advancement in editing in this film. The Kuleshov effect was a very simple, minimal, kind of a two shots that effect that I was discussing. Here in Krishna Janma, you will see editing in a somewhat more, interesting fashion. If you had noticed, the very first scene begins with certain. Begins with people at the lower frontal edge of the screen. That is the supplicating hands of the people who are praying, and then Vishnu appears, in response to the people's pleas. It's a centered image that is offered for us. So the people on the screen kind of take as if they are our representatives, at the edge of the screen, and then Vishnu appears, gives, darshan to the spectators as well. then Vishnu focalizes us to a futuristic view of him. So then the next editing shot is very interesting because we see Vishnu taking us as if it were into a flash forward moment where we see him coming as Krishna in a future yuga. And then after showing the people a future, we go back to see Vishnu assuring the people in the present. Then this is followed by the present when Krishna's mother. So if you consider this as the present, so what would be the flashback? Flashback is the backstory of how Krishna came to be born on earth. So that sequence of Vishnu will be a kind of flashback. As we see Krishna's mother rocking the cradle, again she focalizes a future Krishna with Kamadhenu playing the flute. So again we see a kind of flash forward. In the meanwhile, we have a spatial shift. I want you to notice in this, very, very simple early cinema, all the things, all the, very interesting narrative techniques that are being used through editing. So there is cause and effect, a relationship, there is temporal movement, flashback, flash forward, and there is also a spatial shift because we go on to see Kamsa's palace. So we began with the abode of Vishnu, then we move to Krishna's home where he's born, then we go to Kamsa's palace where we see Kamsa's focalizations of his impending death in the future. So we also see him, hallucinating about Krishna killing him. We see his hallucinations and dreams. So you have all these in a very simple 1918 silent film. You can see all these aspects coming through: causal relations, spatial shifts, as well as temporal shifts, which are coming through editing. As I said, we move across three spaces: Vaikunta, then Krishna's home where his mother is rocking the cradle, and then we go to Kamsa's palace. The Vaikunta sequence, as I said, would be the backstory for his birth if we consider his birth as the present. There are intimations of future in all three spaces, what you call as flash forwards. Just as there is flashback, there is also flash forward in cinema. In these sketchy tableau sequences, it's not like this, it's very clearly worked out, narrative. They are more like sketchy tableau sequences. So much depends on the foreknowledge of the viewer. You fill in the gaps, as the viewer, as the spectator, you fill in the gaps because more or less you know the story of Krishna and how he came to be born and what happens with him and Kamsa later on. Thus, in our discussion so far, we have not yet factored in sound. So we have been looking at all this in very simple silent cinema. We are yet to factor in sound. Instead, what we have done is we have just looked at three functions of editing: manipulation of time, evocation of space, and the way in which causal relations are created through editing. Now I move to the aspect of sound in cinema. As in cinema we have broadly two kinds of sounds: verbal sounds, which are in the form of dialogues, voiceover, the lyrics of the songs, and then we have non-verbal sounds as well, sounds from the mise-en-scène, like the rustling of leaves or traffic, footsteps, of the characters moving around, the closing of a door. So you hear all that as well. These are non-verbal sounds that we hear in cinema. And we also hear background music. So this does not originate from the story as such. This is what is called as extradiegetic sound. We look at the function of this kind of sound as well. So sounds from the extradiegetic world, that is, there are various kinds of sounds that come from, not from the world of the story, but outside of the world of the story. Let's say there are two characters, A and B, whose story is unfolding before our eyes. But outside of that world, there are sounds that come to us, in cinema. So what are these sounds? The narrator could be outside of the world of the story, and the narrator could be a third person narrator, someone who is outside of the story, who is narrating what is happening, going to happen to us in the film. Or it could be a first person retrospective narrator, someone who is now an adult, maybe looking back at what was happening in his or her childhood, and then the story unfolds in cinema. Another kind of sound that comes to us from the extra diegetic world could be background music. Many times it comes to us for emotion, for purposes of emphasis. It's like a cue to the spectators about how a character or action is to be regarded. Is this character to be laughed at, not taken seriously? Is this action supposed to be a comedy? Are we supposed to laugh, or are we supposed to weep? So background music acts as a cue for all that. And there are also lyrics, which are again outside of the extra diegetic world. But through these lyrics, we may, actually end up interpreting a character or a sequence. It may give us a particular kind of perspective or overall meaning. So broadly, these are some of the sounds that come from the extra diegetic world. Now, sounds from within the story world. What are those sounds? Obviously, there are dialogues. We're talking about sound cinema, that is cinema with sound technology. So, how does narration happen in such cinema? So, it could happen through dialogues between the characters, or it could happen through a voiceover of a character narrator. The character could be the character who is the protagonist, the main character, the protagonist of the film. Or it could be someone who is telling the story of the major character. That too, so you have a second person narration, so you have a voiceover of a character narrator there as well. It could be the inner thoughts of a character expressed through a voiceover monologue. So in cinema we can only see. So how do we get access to what is happening in a character's inner world? Very often it is externalized through voiceover, as if the character is speaking aloud his or her thoughts. It could also be in the form of song. So the character could be expressing his or her thoughts or emotions in the form of a song. And then, of course, there are the sounds in the mise en scène, that is, the sounds that take place within the story world. As I gave you the example, footsteps, door opening, closing, whatever happens, where in the location where the characters and the action is taking place. Film narration uses sounds from within the story world as well as outside, that is, extra-diegetic sounds, in different combinations to create different kinds of effects. So, story unfolds through dialogues entirely among the characters. This is an example where you don't have any kind of narrator. The entire story unfolds only through visuals and dialogues of the characters. A second person narrator could be there, and dialogues within the story world among the characters. A second person narrator is telling the story, and then, of course, there are dialogues within the story world. And then it could also be in the form of a third person extra-diegetic narrator who's giving a voiceover of what is to happen, in the film. And then there are, of course, dialogues within the story world among the characters. And it could be a first person retrospective narrator and dialogues within the story world among the characters. So, film narration uses many of these techniques for telling the story. These visual and auditive narrators, these are not necessarily present in the film in any identifiable form. These are basically entities that function to organize the visual and auditive narrative universe for us. So usually story of a film is determined by a kind of audio visual contract. So the audio elements and the visual elements are supposed to come together. They are supposedly working together, but we also have various instances where this may not be so. But in most films, they're supposed to work together. Cuts are determined by sound. So when a character stops speaking, so let's say the camera is focusing on a character who is speaking. Once that character stops speaking and a second character starts to speak, the camera moves there, to show the second character. Or if there is a sound, a loud sound coming on the screen, all of a sudden, is heard from the screen, all of a sudden, the camera follows to show us the source of the sound. So whoever speaks or whatever the noise, the camera follows to reveal the source. The auditive narrator determines whether we hear what the character on screen hears or not. There are times when we see characters listening or conversing on the screen, but the auditive narrator does not bother to give us knowledge of what they hear or speak, frustrating our desire to overhear. So the characters are speaking to each other, but the auditive narrator is holding back the information, not sharing what the characters are speaking with us, the narratees or the audience. On the other hand, there are also times when we hear the sound, but the visual narrator does not oblige by revealing the source of that sound. So you have disembodied sounds. You may find, horror cinema particularly using this kind of technique, where all kinds of sounds are heard as we are watching, but the camera does not necessarily reveal to us where that sound or how that sound is coming through. I move to the last point, of this presentation, which has to do with focalization, how the process of narration happens, and how or what is focalization. Focalization has to do those to whom a story is narrated, that is us, audience, viewers. So focalization has to do with the knowledge that we have vis-a-vis the characters that is relayed through narration. One of the important functions of the auditive and the visual narrators is basically to control this, knowledge that is relayed to us, relayed to narratives. So auditive and visual narrators control the flow of information to narratives. So there are different kinds of knowledge that we may have vis-a-vis the characters. So if the narrative knows more than the characters do, because as you know, the camera can travel everywhere, right? So the camera can show us what is happening to character A, and meanwhile it can jump to character B and also show what is happening to character C. But character A does not necessarily know what is happening to B or C. So this is what is called as zero focalization, where we know as narratees, we know more than any of the characters individually do. So because the camera is generous, it tells us and shows us what is happening in different places at the same time. We have control over the narration because we know more than the characters do. The characters don't know what is happening behind their back, but we narratees are told what happens. But not all films use zero focalization. There are films where the narrative, that is us, we know only as much as the character does. Why? Because maybe a film shows us everything from the point of view of only one character. So only what that character knows, wherever that character goes, we know or we are shown only that much. We don't know what is happening somewhere else where the character is not present or cannot be present. So this is what is called as internally focalized narrative, where the limits of our knowledge as narratives is determined by the limits of the knowledge that the character narrator has. So because the narrator does not know what is happening in other places, we also don't know what is happening in other places. So this is what is called as internal focalization. But the third kind is a very interesting kind of narration that happens in cinema, where the character, the narrative, that is we, know less than the character, because the character is keeping us guessing by not revealing everything that he or she knows, or by misleading us. So here it is called as external focalization. The character, ostensibly seems to be saying or doing something, but actually, something else is unfolding. The character knows that something else has happened, but then we are not shown what the character already knows. So the character plays with the foreknowledge that he or she has and keeps us guessing by not entirely revealing what happens. So this is external focalization. You may have a film which uses any of these, or a combination of these at different points in time. So this through this process, that is through focalization, the information or knowledge that is relayed by the narrator to the narratee. And remember, when I mean narrator, the narrator need not be some entity that is present on the screen, either in the form of a visual or in the form of an audio. It could just be an organizing device. So the narrator, both auditive narrator and the visual narrator, controls this flow of information, and thereby it controls narration in this fashion. I think I'll stop at this point in time. If there are questions, I could provide examples for these things that I'm kind of saying, and probably we can also have a discussion, hopefully with the questions that come. So thank you very much. I'll stop sharing the screen at this point, and I look forward to the questions. And thank you for joining me today.
Okay. Thank you very much, ma'am, for this intriguing session. Because are you getting me right now on the screen?
Yes, yes.
Okay. So it's a wonderful, intriguing session, and we have learned the different ways of narration in cinema. Several questions. We still, I'm not getting any question, but they have liked your session that they have mentioned through their text. Uh, Okay, some Disha, they saying, and this is not a question, basically a great presenting, ma'am. This is the thing that present. If you have any question, we have 5 minutes that we could just discuss about. Uh, if you have any question, the participants, then you could drop your question, and I will take the question to ma'am. So, this is a thing that you have discussed about the session, the narration. It's really several points that we usually watch films, but we most of the time we don't bother about this thing, how the narration is going on. So it's a vivid thing that you have presented, and we have come to know several points. Okay, there is one question from Debanjana Sina. Okay, I'm taking the question on the screen, ma'am.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, Debanjana Sinha is asking, ma'am, nowadays which kind of focalization is used in cinemas? Yeah. I don't know if one can generalize and say that there is a vast change that is happening in focalization or whatever. But certainly, if you look at many of the regional language films, for instance, the film that I'm quite familiar with, which is Kannada cinema, you're getting a number of these very interesting, experiments in focalization, particularly external focalization. So external focalization is where the characters literally take us for a ride, because the characters have a control over the narratives, the viewers. So we seem to be constantly kept guessing by the characters. So the moment we seem to get a hang of what has happened, the ground under our feet is virtually pulled away, and we are told something entirely different, or we come to realize that it's something entirely different. The first kind, that is zero focalization, is probably most widespread even today, where the characters are all there and there is this kind of God's view of the camera, which is giving us all that is happening to all the characters, and we piece together and make a story of what is happening. So certainly zero focalization is the most prevalent. We have internal focalization where particularly where there are first person narratives. So where let us say you go back to see last time I had given this example of 1947 Earth, where you have a retrospective narrator who is telling the story of what happened during her childhood, which is the partition of India. So whatever Lenny, the character, knows and sees is what we know and see, in the film. We can't, seem to understand, or we can't seem to know what is happening in a place where Lenny could not have been. So wherever Lenny is, the film takes us or gives us a sense of what was happening in those worlds. So the limits of Lenny's knowledge and understanding is also in some ways our limits, because that's all we get to see too in the film. But as I said, experiments, externally focalized experiments, a good example of an externally focalized experiment in narration in Hollywood would be the film Fight Club, if you're familiar with that film. And I gave you the example of the, I mean, talked to you about the Kannada context. There is a very interesting new age Kannada film called Lucia. Some of you might be very familiar with that film. That again is an example of external focalization, but it also combines internal focalization. So one part of the narrative is a dream or a hallucination that is unfolding for a particular character who is lying ostensibly in coma on a hospital bed. It's only later that we realize that this character has taken us for a ride. So there is internal focalization, or we seem to think that it is internal focalization, but there is also external focalization working over there, where the character knows much more than we as narrators would know as the narration is unfolding. It's only later that we kind of piece things together. So externally focalized narratives are also those which we as film buffs consider as a difficult film. It's not a film that is easy. So we are puzzled. So what is happening? And we don't easily trust. We cannot easily trust our eyes. So and our ears, because what we are seeing it does not amount to, or is quite the opposite of what it will ultimately turn out to be. So one can't say definitely that there is a change over time, but you have a combination of all these different kinds of techniques used in narration. And thank you for that question.
Ma'am, we have several other questions, so I'm just taking a question on the screen, but this screen might totally off your face because this is quite long. Okay, I hope that you can get that. In Pother Pachali, when Harihar comes back and gets the news of Durga's death, Sarvajaya's loud voice of lamentation is substituted by a stroke of instrumental sound, poignant and high-pitched. Would you comment on this, please?
Yeah, it's a very good example. There are many such instances where where the characters and the conversation between characters or the emotions of the characters are kind of overlaid with background music. So there is a diegetic sound, where the characters are dialoguing, or in this case, lamenting. But all of a sudden, there is an extra diegetic sound because it seems like it's not enough, or the lamentation does not come through enough, or the extra diegetic sound gives a kind of emphasis which is not sufficient by the diegetic sound. One could be that. So in this instance, it could be a kind of overlaying of that sound to create a heightened sense of emotion, and also to make us feel for what is happening to the characters. There are also instances where this could be used for heightening the mystery. So there are two characters who are speaking to each other. The auditive narrator does not give us the dialogue in that particular shot, or in that particular sequence, does not give us the dialogue that is happening between the characters. Instead gives a loud background music. So why? So as to create a sense of suspense. So it could be for giving a kind of heightened emotion. I really thank you for giving me that example from Poter Panchali. Or it could be for other reasons, as to continue with the mystery for some more time, by not allowing us, letting us overhear the characters, when they are conversing, bringing in background music. So there are very, very interesting experiments and interesting ways of how background music works in cinema. Last time somebody was asking me what is the latest in film studies research. I wish there would be an exclusive research on the various ways in which background music is deployed by different filmmakers, or has been deployed by filmmakers over time. And thanks again for a great question.
Okay, ma'am. Ma'am, there is another question from Arun Kumar NA. Can you please differentiate between diegetic sound, non-diegetic, and extra diegetic sound?
Yeah. I'm not here making too much of a distinction between non-diegetic and extra diegetic sound. Non-diegetic sound, probably something that is not part of the diegesis, which may be inadvertently there, probably only in that sense. But diegetic sound, that which is heard within the mise en scène. Extra diegetic sound, that could be in the form of, as I said, background music or voiceovers. So let's say a video like this, which is, where we have a non-diegetic sound that is coming through, right? So it's not for emphasis. It's not, within the diegesis, if this is a narration that is happening. So it could be, some kind of noise that seems to impinge on the diegesis. But I haven't really spoken about non-diegetic sound in this conversation. But thanks for drawing my attention to that category. Yeah.
Thank you.
Ma'am, the idea of dramatic irony in theatre, is it similar to zero focalization in cinema? Yes, in a way, you're right, Anna. This is Anna Pallet who's asking this. Yeah, you're right. If by dramatic irony you mean we know as spectators, we know more than the character do. So the character is operating without any kind of knowledge about what is to happen, for instance, in Oedipus or Oedipus Rex or whatever. So the character does not know. So he's committing mistakes after mistakes, or crimes after crimes, whereas we know as spectators. we can understand the implications of the character's action, but the character, as you say, is quite unaware of what are the implications of his or her action. In cinema, it is that it's also a way of creating some kind of spectatorial authority or control over the narration. So we know, what character B does not know about character A, because the camera has shown us what character A is doing in the confines of his room. Character B is not there in the room at that point in time, so character B does not know if character A is hatching some plot or whatever. So it's used more in terms of supply of information. That's what I mean. But it could also have the function in terms of us feeling a certain kind of protectiveness or sympathy towards a particular character as well. Yeah. Thanks again for the question.
Okay, ma'am. We have a question from Disha De. This is asking, ma'am, in the external focalization, can this thing happen that a narrative mind lost the connection with the narrative style because of the inferior position of knowing?
Yeah. Actually, in external focalization, there is a story. Another example that I could possibly think of at the moment is, Shutter Island. So there is a kind of, we are hooked onto the story. It's not like in external focalization, we are, left to our own. No, the narrative hooks us. So the story kind of hooks us on. But it's only towards the end that we realize that this narrator has taken us for a royal ride. So it's not that externally focalization is disengaged in any way. It is that the way the character is taking us through the narration, or the way in which the narrator, the filmic narrator, is unfolding the story for us. It seems like the character always seems to have a greater hold, because he seems to know more. He or she in the narrative seems to know more than we do. So it's a kind of manipulation of the narrative. It's a very interesting kind of effect that it creates, where we feel manipulated, where we feel taken for a ride, where we feel the ground undercut. It's undercutting us. So if we have this confidence that, okay, I know where we are headed, this kind of narration kind of cuts us short by saying, well, you don't know, right? So external focalization is not, disengaged kind of narration. It's just that we don't know enough, and we are, what we think we know turns out to be quite different from what is, what actually unfolds. So that's what external focalization does.
Okay, ma'am. Another question. Momita D is asking, are there films in which the director is taking us for a ride? Doesn't the director control narration?
Yeah, I did not use the word director in the entire presentation. Instead, I used the term narrator, visual narrator, auditive narrator, or there are others who have used the term filmic composition device. Now, the director is outside of the film, both the diegetic and the extra-diegetic world of the film. So, leaving that world behind, if we enter into the narration, the actual process of the unfolding of the story before our eyes, right? So if we enter that world, we have to leave behind the director over here, because some other narratorial entity is determining for us what information to give and what to withhold. So the director works in a different realm. So generally in film narratology, we talk of narrative levels, right? So the level at which the narrator works is once the unfolding of the film begins, who has control over that process. So the director has control outside of the film or during the film making process, but in the process of narration, that is, as we are watching the film, we forget the director, right? So there is some entity which is organizing that world for us, determining what to show, what to hold back, when to give this information, when to give a cue, how to interpret a character. So I'm talking about a time when which unfolds, which begins to unfold as we watch a film. The director works outside of that space. So let's talk about the narrator. There are many entities. As you know, film is a collaborative endeavor. The director is some kind of organizer who organizes finances, who organizes music, who organizes, the entire process of production, pre-production, writing, script. Yes, but once the story begins, unfolding before our eyes, we leave behind the director and talk about a narrator. So conceptually, we make a distinction. In literary studies, you make a distinction between author and narrator. So here also, we make a distinction between director and narrator.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you. And this should be the last one, I hope.
Okay.
Is there a cinematic equivalent of the literary Andhula Bhundeja?
Yeah, thank you so much, Arun Kumar. I think it's a very, very interesting question, and this is again a very interesting area of study, the unreliable narrator. Yes, if Nellie Dean is considered as an unreliable narrator in some ways in Wuthering Heights, certainly there are plenty of films where you just need to go and Google unreliable narrator in cinema. You'll get plenty of examples, where this unreliable narrator works, and many times the unreliable narrator works. The work of the unreliable narrator can be seen in externally focalized films. So external focalization or sometimes internal focalization. That is when the character himself or herself narrates, then we feel, this character is not someone who is trustworthy, is not someone who can really tell us what is happening, right? So it can happen in internally focalized films. It certainly happens in externally focalized films. So we do have unreliable narrators in cinema. Fight Club is a good example of that, as would be Shutter Island, I would think. Maybe even Memento. And also in Indian cinema, I gave you the offhand, I can think of Lucia. So again, an unreliable narrator in Lucia. Yeah.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you very much for this really intriguing and wonderful session. And it's a treat to our eyes as well as ear to listen to you while delivering lecture. So this is not exception to this session also. So on this note, thank you very much, ma'am. And the several wishes have come. Just usually we get when you deliver a lecture, it's quite expected thing from the viewers like us. And I hope the
Thank you.
next time, whenever we need you, we will get on our platform. So thank you, ma'am. I'm removing you from this broadcast, but be there. I will talk to you for a
Yeah.
few things. Okay.
Yeah. Sure.
So thank
Thank
you
you.
very
Thank
much.
you very much. Thank you.
Okay. So, participants, viewer, thank you very much for joining us this session number 13. But this is not the last session. Session 14 is also awaiting us. And session 14 is going to take place on 7th August. at the time is same 7 p.m. And in that session, we're going to get a lecture from Dr. Madhumita Mojumdar, and she's going to delineate with the topic that is who is the storyteller, interrogating the narrative voices in Wuthering Heights. So wait for the next session, and thank you very much again for joining us. And be safe and stay protected. Good night. I'm going to come back on 7th August with another session. Till then, tada, bye bye.